He acts really like cutesy, like he's clearly got some form of sociopathic disorder.
He just gets off on making videos.
And with that, new police body cam footage has just been released in the Reckless BAM case. Not the footage from the police raid. We've already covered that in a previous video, but recordings made before any of that happened. Before officers showed up with search warrants, before the temporary restraining order, before this entire dispute spiraled into the legal mess we're still trying to untangle today. There's a new Reckless BAM video on YouTube. I have linked that down below, but I'm sure you've all seen that by now, right? There's also a new video on Ben's Patreon, an interview with the Kaiser police chief. It's kinda summing up everything that happened back in Oregon. I'm not gonna use material from that, right? If you want to see that for yourself, I mean, you are free to subscribe to Ben's Patreon. I do recommend it. It gave me hours of entertainment, I will say that. But I will say that the Oregon cops, at least they seem to have gotten the bigger picture at this point in time. According to Ben, that conversation happened somewhere between his parts 1 and 2. Also in it, Ben speculates that Bricks Minifigs will give in before he ever posts any of his videos. Now there's more body cam footage available that is beyond the scope of this video. I'll still make sure to link that down below as well. Apparently Ammon managed to get his brothers involved and have them complain about their lives and their families' lives to the police as well. I just need more time to verify these stories, right? We will therefore only look at the body cam footage of Officer Abrams on March 11, and especially his interactions with Ammon both on the phone and in person. Generally speaking, if you've been following the series, you already know that one of the biggest challenges has always been separating facts from, well, hindsight, right? Once you know how a story ends, it's incredibly easy to assume everyone involved, they already saw it coming, right? But they definitely didn't. These recordings capture Ammon at a point where his theory of the case was already remarkably expansive, but it was still being translated into police reports, into criminal allegations, and into proposed charges. And nobody knew where any of this was ultimately heading. Which gives us the rare opportunity to examine this case with the benefit of hindsight, right? We get to hear what Bricks Minifigs chose to tell the police, what they could actually support with evidence, very little, what was still speculation, all of it, and perhaps most interestingly of all, how the responding officers reacted to those claims. Because if there's one thing that surprised me while watching these new recordings, it's that the Orem cops, they aren't nearly as passive participants as many people seem to assume, right? They do listen to Ammon, but still, they ask questions, not necessarily the right ones, but still, they push back a little, right? They explain what they can and what they can't do. And in doing so, they inadvertently give us one of the clearest windows yet into how this entire case developed. To make this easy to follow, I've separated the entire story into 3 chapters. Today, we're not asking who's right and who's wrong. You make up your own mind, right, about that. But I want to ask, how did Ammon's allegations become a police narrative before the raid? Chapter 1, Bricks and Minifigs' version of events. Before we analyze anything, I think it's important that we establish one ground rule, right? Just because someone tells the police something, that doesn't mean it's true. But it also doesn't mean they're lying. What it tells us is what they chose to present to law enforcement at that particular point in time. Whether those statements reflected genuine belief or strategic exaggeration or outright fabrication, that is something we can now assess with the benefit of hindsight, right? Throughout this video, we're going to see 3 separate categories emerge. Claims that were supported by evidence, claims that were reasonable suspicions, and claims that ultimately didn't go anywhere. And yes, we're also going to talk about a few statements that simply do not survive comparison with the evidence. With that in mind, let's jump in and experience how BAM described the situation to Orem Police on March 11th, 2026, from the very beginning. Ammon McNeff presents this not as a dispute over Lego sets, but as a coordinated campaign against the company. Allegedly, this has been going on for almost a year and had recently escalated dramatically.
We have an individual who's been trying to extort our business for the past almost year.
He tells the responding officer that staff members had been followed to their homes, that stores had been vandalized in Oregon, that employees were receiving threats, and that people associated with Reckless BAM had started showing up at multiple Bricks and Minifigs locations across Utah. just how broad their theory of the case already was, it's kind of crazy. This wasn't simply a YouTuber keeps filming inside our stores. Instead, Bricks and Minifigs believed they were dealing with an organized effort spanning multiple states, involving harassment and stalking, extortion, forged documents, fraudulent gift certificates, which I still find hilarious if they really mean the Guinness World Record by that. And I mean, coordinated activity between several different individuals. Whether every one of these allegations ultimately held up is something we'll come back to later. But I mean, you know. For now, what's important is that this is the framework through which Bricks and Minifigs understood everything that followed, right? Another detail worth pointing out is that this investigation was still very much in its early stages. At one point, McNeff tells the officer that Detective Doré has Ben's driver's license information because he himself had participated in a double-blind photo lineup.
They had me come in and look at multiple images in a double-blind, lineup. Through images, and they had me pinpoint him and identify him through that double-blind lineup.
And you remember this absolutely flawless piece of detective work.
So, just to let you know, we call it double-blind. The person who committed the crime may or may not be in the lineup or depicted. So I will give this to you. You'll have as much time as you need to choose someone or to not choose anyone. Whenever you're able to feel that you have ID'd somebody, I just ask that you circle it and then initial next to it.
And then, like that.
Perfect.
Okay. There you go. Okay. Cool.
At this point, Ammon knows neither Ben's middle name nor his date of birth. Looking back, after everything that happened since, it's easy to imagine that everyone already had a complete picture of who everyone else was. They just didn't. They're still assembling that picture as this conversation unfolds. And one theme emerges almost immediately, right? Employee safety. Early on, McNeff tells Officer Abrams,
we all sighed a big sigh of relief this morning knowing that he was arrested last night. And then to have this happen all over again, everyone's feeling some pretty significant trauma that he's just not going to stop.
Later, that concern becomes even more explicit, so watch out for that in Chapter 2. One thing you'll notice throughout this conversation is that Ammon consistently frames the situation in the most serious terms possible. Almost every allegation is presented as part of a much larger pattern. This isn't just trespassing. It isn't just harassment. It's organized criminal activity. It's extortion.
Saying, well, hey, I'll leave you guys alone and stop filming and doing all this other stuff if you guys just pay me $200,000.
And he doesn't stop there, alleging interstate collusion. It's potentially even federal RICO.
And so they're looking at doing a potential civil RICO case, and I would not be surprised if the prosecutor might even look at this as a federal RICO case.
Now remember, this is March 2026. We know today how that prediction turned out. But for the moment, put that out of your mind, right? We're trying to understand why and how the responding officer is hearing this case the way he is. Every time the conversation has a chance to settle on a specific incident, Ammon zooms back out to the grand narrative. Multiple states, right? Organized conspiracies, traumatized employees, federal crimes. It's almost as if he's trying to convince Officer Abrams that this is bigger than the individual facts in front of him, that this is an immediate public safety issue, rather than a dispute that still requires investigation. And in all fairness, Abrams does at least try to appear somewhat unbiased.
If we can prove that, right? We have to have probable cause to arrest people.
Which brings us to what I found to be the most noteworthy part of the entire bodycam footage. Not what Bricks and Minifigs said, but how the police responded. Let's find out in Chapter 2, Officer Abrams. If Chapter 1 was about Bricks and Minifigs' version of events, Chapter 2 is about something you most likely didn't expect. A Utah police officer who occasionally does some of his job. Because if you spend enough time online, you'll inevitably come across the claim that Utah law enforcement was simply doing Bricks and Minifigs' bidding. That officers heard a story, believed every word of it, and immediately started building a case against Reckless Ben. And it's hard to argue with that perception for a lot of the AFPD and Provo coverage out there. Here, on the other hand, that's at least not the full story, and we must give credit, I think, where credit is due. I mean, very occasionally, right? Obviously, Abrams also said this about the charges they're fabricating for Ben.
You know, that's another charge, obviously. I mean, we'll stack him until he leaves you guys alone, I guess. You know what I mean? Or they put him in jail, one or the other.
Now, to be fair, we should be careful not to overinterpret a single sentence. Police officers aren't robots, right? They don't speak like legal textbooks, especially in informal conversations. But you see, throughout the conversation, Abrams never dismisses Ammon's concerns. In fact, he's remarkably empathetic, maybe a little too empathetic. One might even say Abrams genuinely seems to sympathize with Bricks and Minifigs. He repeatedly acknowledges that if these allegations are true, they are serious. However, at this point, nobody has established that Ben committed any of these crimes Ammon is alleging. That's the entire purpose of an investigation, is it not? The goal cannot be to stack charges. That's just not a police officer's job. The goal has to be to determine which charges, if any, are actually supported by the evidence. And that's, I'm afraid, where Abrams starts feeling inconsistent. A few minutes later, he's reminding everyone that they need evidence, that detectives have to review the case, that probable cause actually means something.
You know, if there's 5 people there, right, and they keep doing this, and there's a pattern of repetition, right, it is stalking.
Yeah.
So all 5 of them should be charged.
Right.
If we can prove that, right? We have to have probable cause to arrest people.
Yeah, I'm not sure all 5 of them should be charged is the most reassuring way to introduce that. But still, this is Abrams recognizing that the accusations being made around him are not yet established facts. The problem is that he does not maintain that distance consistently. When discussing the wider Provo investigation, he explains that the decision ultimately belongs to detectives, but then immediately adds,
But it sounds like Provo already has a good case, so hopefully that's going to go somewhere.
based on what exactly? Abrams has heard Ammon's account and reviewed one brief store video at this point, without sound, by the way. He has not examined the evidence collected by Provo. He has not interviewed Ben or independently verified most of the allegations being discussed. Nevertheless, he is already speaking as though the basic direction of that investigation is probably correct, right? He just assumes Provo PD does their job correctly. And again, with the benefit of hindsight, we know how that turned out, don't we? By the end of that encounter, this is no longer limited to sympathetic comments. Abrams tells Bam that he intends to file a commercial obstruction charge immediately.
I am going to file for commercial obstruction, which is a Class A misdemeanor right away.
Okay.
The stalking case is going to have to be followed up on by detectives, right? I think it's a good case, but I don't know all the facts yet. So I can tell you from what I hear so far, it's something that would interest me, right?
That is a remarkable sequence of sentences, right? He thinks this is a good case. He intends to file one charge immediately. He also acknowledges that he does not know all the facts yet. Now, those positions, they're not completely irreconcilable, but they demonstrate exactly why I find this conduct so difficult to assess. Abrams knows the proper procedure and occasionally articulates it very clearly, yet he repeatedly seems to reach the desired conclusion before the procedure has actually run its course. Gee, I wonder why he's not a detective anymore. His final advice makes the problem even more apparent. Rather than having the employees personally notify Ben that he has been trespassed, Abrams tells them,
Just call 911.
Okay.
Just call us. If he shows back up, call 911.
Okay. Should we
Don't chase him out.
kind of keep him
Yeah, I wouldn't even tell him. I would just call 911.
Okay.
Have us show up so we can take him to jail.
Okay.
there may be a legitimate safety argument for asking police to handle a trespass notice. But within the wider context of this conversation, after the discussion of stacking charges, of stalking injunctions, of getting Ben back to jail, it sounds a lot less like neutral safety advice and much more like a strategy for producing the next arrest. And again, Ammon and his cronies could have just interacted with Ben, give the Lego sets back, and be done with all of this. And lest we forget, we have to address the shotgun in the room.
In your opinion, would you go get a shotgun and bring it in the store?
So what I can do, I can't give you my opinion on that,
Got it.
but I
understand.
but I can tell you that, carrying a firearm in the state of Utah, even concealed, is completely legal as long as you're not a restricted person.
Yes.
Right? And so I personally encourage people who are able to carry legally to carry.
What? Is Ammon asking permission to commit premeditated murder? How can that be the solution? Maybe that's just my European mind that cannot comprehend a statement like that from an actual police officer on active duty. But I find the suggestion outrageous. Ammon arming his staff can never lead to any kind of peaceful resolution to any of this, even if that's perfectly lawful in Utah. That's wild to me. And even if it's all above board and normal in Utah, I don't think this was a particularly wise answer, because at this point, Abrams only has one side of the story. He's standing inside the complainant's business, listening to increasingly serious allegations that have not yet been verified, while the complainant is openly asking whether his employees should arm themselves. Personally, I think that's a moment where a little more restraint would have gone a long way. The irony is that Abrams is actually at his best whenever he sticks to the procedure. One of his best moments in the entire footage happens after Ammon insists Ben must have violated some condition of his release. Instead of simply agreeing, Abrams picks up the phone and calls the jail.
Did he have any kind of a no contact order or a jail release agreement, anything?
Not for this case, no. We only require, or the state code only requires the JRA for DV,
Right.
sex crimes, and child abuse.
That's good. That's exactly what I want to see from a police officer. You all know how to do your job. Why not, I don't know, do it more often? Someone makes a factual claim, you verify it. You don't assume, you don't speculate, you check. But Abrams' immediate reaction is also rather revealing.
Ah, dang it. Man, because he literally left the jail and went right back to this business and harassed a bunch of the people there.
So even when he follows the correct procedure, he does not exactly sound like a neutral observer receiving new information. He sounds disappointed that the no contact order and therefore the additional charge he had already discussed, it just does not exist. And I mean, is that what you learn in police school or whatever minor training they all must have gone through? A little later again, he seems to make sure that he actually documents everything. I like that. I think it's the correct internal protocol running here.
What I'm going to do is I'm going to take your exact words
Yep.
and attach those to the report, if that makes sense.
Yep,
Okay?
absolutely. So
That way there's
exactly.
oh, sorry about that.
You have the chairs there.
There's no confusion.
And then after a small cameo from everyone's favorite cartoon villain sidekick over the phone, he goes,
What I want to do is I need all of this information.
Yep.
That they need to make reports to whatever agency where they live. And I understand that this is very widespread over several states. So it's not like this is just in Orem itself.
Right.
But anything to do with Orem, I need that. I need that stuff, okay?
and he continues to collect more evidence, having one of the store employees send him a video of Ben and team at the Orem location, which, again, that's good. It leaves some room for them to come to the same conclusion the Kaiser PD back in Oregon seems to have already come to. So Abrams does collect evidence. He verifies the absence of a no-contact order. He asks for statements, video footage for exact times and case numbers. None of that is objectionable. It is quite literally his job. What is objectionable is how frequently his language seems to get ahead of the evidence. He speaks about stacking charges, describes the Provo case as a good one without having reviewed it, and sounds openly disappointed when the additional charge he anticipated turns out not to exist. The problem is therefore not that Abrams investigates Ammon's allegations. The problem is that he occasionally speaks as though those allegations have already been established while the investigation is still taking place. That distinction is what makes the footage so revealing. Ammon provides the narrative. Abrams begins treating parts of it as credible before independently verifying them. And the resulting police reports can then make the original allegations appear more substantial than they were when first presented. Which brings us to Chapter 3, what the footage adds. Perhaps the clearest demonstration of the gap between rhetoric and result is what apparently did not happen. Despite Abrams discussing commercial obstruction, attaching the incident to a stalking case, and having officers take Ben to jail if he returned, there's no indication in the available Orem records that the department ultimately pursued charges. The records also appear to show that Bam never applied for the stalking injunction or protection order Abrams repeatedly described as the appropriate legal remedy. Orem PD may have joined the chat, but it does not appear to have joined the prosecution. The rest of the footage nevertheless raises serious questions about appropriate police conduct, right? Abrams remarked that the police could stack charges until Ben either left Bricks Minifigs alone or was placed in jail is not merely unfortunate phrasing. It suggests that the desired outcome had already begun to influence how he spoke about future enforcement. His response to Ammon's question about bringing a shotgun into the store is similarly revealing. I want to be clear, Abrams did not authorize violence, but he did personally encourage legally eligible people to carry firearms in a dispute whose basic facts have not yet been independently established. And it seems to me that this is just his go-to advice in general. If you can carry, carry. I find that problematic on a whole different level, but we don't need to get into that now, probably a different video. Thing is, there is no tangible proof of police corruption in this new footage, but corruption is not the only standard by which police conduct should be evaluated, right? An officer can follow certain procedures correctly while still becoming too sympathetic to one party's account. Abrams appears to move between those positions throughout the recording. At some points, he narrows the discussion back to evidence. At others, he seems to accept Ammon's framing of Ben as a continuing danger and speaks as though the role of the police is to find enough charges to make that danger disappear. That inconsistency is much more significant than the simple question of whether Abrams is a good or a bad cop, right? You want law enforcement to be reliable, to be consistent. You want to know what you can expect. The footage also gives us a better understanding of Detective Medina Doray's place in the investigation. She seems to only recently have been promoted from officer to detective. I read somewhere that this is her first case, right? And for some reason, Ammon repeatedly presents her involvement as some kind of circumstantial evidence that a substantial criminal case was already developing. I do think we'll hear from her again. I bet she makes another appearance in Ben's Part 4. Mark my words, I'm looking forward to that. But what we now have is information moving between complainants, patrol officers, and detectives working in different jurisdictions. Once allegations begin accumulating across several police departments, the existence of multiple reports can itself create the impression that each allegation has already been independently verified, when it has not. And that is absolutely part of Ammon's strategy. Of course, in reality, several reports may simply have been repeating different versions of the same underlying claims, but Ammon makes it appear that Ben already has an extensive multi-state criminal record. And the most extreme example of this problem is Ammon's absolutely wild theory about Ben's supposed relative in Ohio. And the origin story of that theory, that's just trademark Bricks and Minifigs.
Honest to goodness, he's a sociopath.
Okay.
As we've done some additional searches on him,
Right.
he has it appears that a relative of his, because he's originally from Ohio and then he moved to LA, some relative of his with the same name, that based on what we can piece together, was convicted of child porn or child sexual contact, some of these other types of things.
Uh-huh.
So there's a very real chance that he may have been abused as a child, but that set him through a mental disorder, kind of whatever the case may be. He's clearly a sociopath that does not care about the system.
So Ammon appears to have simply Googled Ben's name together with the state he's from and found a much older Ohio man with the same name who had been convicted in a child pornography case. From that search result alone, Ammon constructs a theory that the man might be Ben's relative, that Ben might have been abused as a child, and that this hypothetical abuse might explain the sociopathic disorder Ammon had already decided Ben possessed. And I mean, this is not the first time he has accused someone else of something he himself has long been suspected of. Of course, he doesn't provide any evidence. Again, classic Bam style. The man he found is obviously not Ben himself, and sharing a very common name and a state of origin, that's not remotely sufficient to establish a family relationship. That's a German name, by the way. Schneider means tailor, and there's like hundreds of Benjamin Schneiders here in Europe. Nevertheless, Ammon presents the theory to a police officer as though it were the product of meaningful research into Ben's background. A Google result has become a possible relative. That possible relative has become a possible childhood trauma, and the possible trauma has become a retrospective explanation for a psychiatric diagnosis Ammon is entirely unqualified to make. Add that to the list of things he's unqualified for, like running a business or handling public relations. Now, this is not simply an embarrassing tangent. It illustrates how Ammon's broader narrative operates. He begins with a small piece of information, fills the gap with speculation, and then presents the resulting theory with far more confidence than the evidence permits. Each speculative step depends upon the previous one, but by the time the conclusion is delivered, the assumptions connecting them have almost disappeared from view. And at least in Utah, he regularly finds people who fall for this bullshit. Guys, get your act together. What are you doing? This is such an obvious scam. And yet, all of you are standing around, mouths open, like you just saw a witch. Regardless, the wider lesson here, again, is not that police should ignore complainants or refuse to investigate information found online. Open source research can produce legitimate leads. The problem begins when a lead is no longer treated as something requiring verification and instead becomes part of a factual foundation of a case. A matching name is a reason to ask another question. It's not an answer. I cannot believe I have to spell that out for you. And the same distinction applies to virtually every allegation discussed in these recordings. A report is not a conviction. A suspicion is not probable cause. And the repetition of a claim across several jurisdictions does not make the original claim more reliable. Why do we have to go over this time and time again? This is ultimately what the newly released body cams add to our understanding of the case. They show how Ammon's allegations were assembled, how they were communicated to different police departments, and how at least one officer in Orem began responding to the narrative rather than merely documenting it. The result is not evidence of a carefully coordinated conspiracy between Bricks and Minifigs and Utah law enforcement. It is something considerably more ordinary, and for that reason perhaps more dangerous as well. One person presenting speculation as facts, officers passing information through an expanding investigation, and institutional momentum gradually developing around claims that had not all been subjected to the same level of scrutiny. Let me be very clear. He can't keep getting away with this. Somebody please do their job. And if you want to see me do more of my job and this story through, please remember to hit subscribe down below, like this video to show the algorithm who's boss, and maybe consider supporting OnlyRants. Just like channel members Luke Highwalker 8900 and Christopher Lambert, or Patreons Fridge and MPE25. I'm gonna be abroad for a couple of days, so don't expect a new video immediately next week. But little spoiler, it looks like we're getting a lot of exclusive and never before seen body cam footage and documents very soon. Stay tuned for that, and never forget, du bist gut genug. Welcome to my ant card. This is just a hangout. Yeah, I'ma crank that shit. Bro, that's so damn loud. It's nothing but a little intermission. Enjoy these soothing bars of utter indecision. Buddy people, you can trust me. It's an ant card. I know all those fire jokes and get you saying hard. It's an ant card. This shit ain't some voodoo, bro. I know you want to stay, but it's time for you to go.